worries.
Screening at Monsterfest is a documentary called The Tunnel, The Other Side of Darkness, which is a 10th anniversary documentary about the original film, The Tunnel, that was made in 2011. And it's my great pleasure to have the executive producer of the documentary and, of course, the co-writer and producer, etc., of the original The Tunnel, Enzo Tedeschi. Enzo, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be on.
Now, tell me about making this documentary. I know you didn't direct the documentary, but you, of course, are executive producer of it. What was the steps along the way to make a documentary about the 10th anniversary of The Tunnel?
Yeah, well, I think, over the last sort of decade since the film's come out, it's the one project that everyone wants to talk to me about, all the time, which is lovely and great. But I do find myself telling the same stories a lot, right? So it occurred to me that a great thing or a useful thing to do might be to bring all of those stories together, not just the making of the film and what we did to finance it and all that distribution stuff, which is the story that everyone knows, but also be able to chat about some of the aftermath and the things that happened post-release, which obviously we didn't really get much of a chance to talk about, because once the film came out, people, largely speaking, media-wise, stopped caring, right? So I reached out to Adrian Nugent, who was one of our early employees at Distracted Media soon after we'd made The Tunnel, actually, and asked him if he was interested in pulling together the reams and reams of behind-the-scenes footage that we had and shoot some interviews and see if we could pull something meaningful together. Because I also conscious of the fact that I needed to maintain some distance from it, so it didn't just become an ego fluff project for me. That's not the intention. So that's kind of how it came about and why. From there, it's just a really small team and a lot of hard work.
Well, congratulations on all of that, and as you say, you kept a bit of distance from the documentary. However, I found it so absorbing and so interesting because of the archival footage, the interviews, and other information. Yeah. Yeah,
great. I mean, that was the intention. There's a lot. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, as you end up with any film that you make, documentary or otherwise, there's so much stuff that you end up leaving on the cutting room floor because, no one wants to sit through a 4-hour movie of anything, largely speaking. So there are stories we still didn't get to tell, but I'm glad that, what people are seeing seems to be compelling, which is great.
And I can imagine the editing process for the documentary would have been quite difficult, because deciding what to leave in and what to leave out is always a difficult process.
It is. It's a very difficult process, and it's made all the more difficult by the fact that, especially in terms of production and pre-production material, Julian Harvey, who was my co-writer and co-producer on the film, I don't think any of us realized that he was making a separate film while we were all making the film. He was just rolling on everything all the time. So there was so much coverage of this material, of everyone doing their thing and making it all happen. So it was very challenging. But Dan, our editor, and Adrian, our director, sort of came together to really wrangle that, with a little bit of help from me, to just sort of go, I think I remember a thing that happened on that day where we might have got this, and trying to point them in the direction of stuff, because it was just so much material to trawl through, so much.
Well, congratulations on the finished product, which is premiering, I gather, at Monsterfest.
Absolutely, yeah. We're really stoked that the guys have included us in the official selection. It's always fun to screen at Monster.
Certainly is. Now, The Tunnel was in some respects quite groundbreaking, using found footage to some extent, but also that sort of underground horror story of the set in Sydney, underground railways, all that sort of thing, and some of the difficulties that the actors had to go through, and which of course is revealed in the documentary. I was quite impressed by that original film, and I gather it had quite significant, I suppose, acclaim elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, in probably no small part, thanks to some of the crazy distribution stuff we did and putting it online at a time when people putting their films and things online was still, you know, people were still working out how that was going to work in relation to all of the traditional media stuff. You know, I mean, we've racked up something like over 25 million views and downloads and whatever of the film to date. So clearly that's not all from Australia. So yeah, no, I think we landed quite well overseas, and even now I'm seeing, you know, people, we often make you know, the occasional top 10 list of, you know, horror films from Australia, or top 10 of found footage films or whatever. I mean, a highlight for me in the documentary was you know, we managed to score an interview with Eduardo Sanchez, who is the director of one of the directors of the Blair Witch Project, and to hear him talk about our film, which was like, Blair Witch was a massive influence on us when we were you know, conceiving the tunnel. To hear him talk about our film and hold it in acclaim with you know, in the, you know, top 5 or 10 found footage films ever, is kind of like a huge, I don't even know how to describe that as a movie nerd, a movie fan, and a filmmaker, and a fan of Blair Witch. It's like, yeah, it's a little bit insane.
But it's interesting you did something at the time, which you've already alluded to, that you went online so that the film could be out there almost immediately and garner an audience. And yet, of course, that created issues for you in terms of getting some sort of commercial distribution, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest problem out of all of that arose from not just the fact that we put it up online, but that we chose BitTorrent as an avenue to do that, which of course, especially at the time, was, I mean, still is, but it was a big problem at the time, was synonymous with piracy. You know, BitTorrent as a platform, as a technology, is completely legitimate. It's just that it gets used a lot for things that are not so legitimate. So, you know, I think there was a view at the time, and we do cover, as you say, a lot of this in the doco, that the fact that we were giving people permission to share our film, but using BitTorrent to do it, was seen as the traditional media establishment was seeing it as us condoning piracy, which was not the intention. But I think that just made life a little bit more difficult than it probably needed to.
Yes, yes. And it's so interesting, when the film came along in 2011, the horror genre in Australian cinema was not, I suppose, that popular, or was not a great sort of genre in many respects. People always preferring drama, I suppose. But horror has now emerged as being a significant subgenre in Australian filmmaking.
Well, you know, I think it depends on who you talk to, which side of the fence they take on that one. You know, for me, I think genre cinema in Australia has always been a significant and meaningful part of the landscape. But I feel as though there's still some hangover even today of you know, cultural cringe remaining from all of those 10BA films from the 70s and 80s, that, you know, there was a lot of very average, if we're being kind, stuff being made, but there were also some incredible gems that came out of that era. But I think, generally speaking, the older industry still has a cultural cringe towards that kind of genre, because they think of that stuff, whereas horror as a genre has evolved far beyond that. You know, it's a very broad church, and it's so much more sophisticated now than your, you know, trashy slasher. That you know, that was another uphill fight that we chose all of the best elements to combine to just make our life as difficult as humanly possible at the time, basically.
And yet here we are with a successful film and a documentary about it now as well. So that's
yeah, there's something, right? Where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah.
It always is. And it was so interesting to hear from some of the actors who obviously went through the mire when the filming occurred in 2011, like Belle,
quite literally,
Delia and Andy, and all the others. So do they look back fondly in respect to the way you see it, to their role in the film?
Well, you look, I think that one of the things for me as I sit back and watch the documentary as a spectator rather than someone trying to make a thing, the one overwhelming sense that I get from everybody, not just in the behind the scenes footage, but also from their interviews, is just the absolute blast everybody had making this film. Like there was a vibe on that set that I think even today, you know, to date, I've done a whole bunch of other projects since, never really recaptured the feeling of camaraderie and friendship and just silliness and good time. Like it was, yeah, I would say to answer your question succinctly, yes, I believe they look back on it and fondly, despite the challenges that perhaps we put them through. And I mean, you know, we also went out of our way to make sure that everything was safe, and you know, we weren't cowboys about it. There's no excuse for putting people in danger or you know, anything completely unsafe. But yeah, there were probably things that we wouldn't be asking people to do now.
Fair enough. Yes, health and safety has become very prominent now on film sets.
And rightly so. Rightly so.
Rightly so. Yeah. Absolutely. And just the overall look and sound of the film, all of that was just so well put together at the time. The original, The Tunnel, and that you had some really good collaborators who spent a lot of time making the film look and sound right.
Yeah, well, and a lot of those collaborators we you know, I still work with to this day. Like it was an amazing experience, and there's some talented people. But you know, from the score to the sound design, you know, visual effects, all of that sort of stuff, everybody really came to the party and gave The Tunnel 110%. You know, and for a tiny film, first time feature filmmakers, we were really trying to, you know, you're always trying to overshoot your budget and try and excel and transcend it. But when you've really got 50 cents to rub together, you're really trying to do that. So eternally grateful for all of those people who contributed and lifted everything to the next level, you know.
Yes. And speaking of budget, I mean, what was also groundbreaking at the time was the use of crowdfunding and utilizing that to pretty good effect to make sure you had a budget.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the time as well, it was very early on in the whole crowdfunding story, right? So I think Kickstarter had just launched, but I think the most meaningful thing, or the most sizable thing I'd seen funded on Kickstarter at the time, was someone had raised $30,000 for a RoboCop statue or something in Philadelphia or something like that, right? Or Detroit, sorry. And we just looked at that and said, there's something here. And as we were trying to work out how to put all of that stuff together, you know, we came across this idea of pre-selling frames of the film. And so while we were crowdfunded, we didn't actually use a crowdfunding platform. We kind of rolled our own and built our own website to make that all happen with the help of Delicious and all of those guys. So yeah, it was we were the first feature film in Australia to be crowdfunded, and I think we fell into all of the traps that goes along with being the first to try anything, right? So.
Yes, but still, you can look back with confidence that you really trailed a blaze there and were groundbreaking and did things that now so many films are utilizing. So yeah, well done on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So with this documentary, The Tunnel, the Other Side of Darkness, after Monster Fest, how will the film be rolled out?
That is a very good question and is still a little bit up in the air. So we've got a couple of open conversations at the moment, but yeah, that's a to be continued. Obviously, we'd love it to pop up on a streamer or something like that. I don't know if it's got enough juice for a theatrical release at this stage. So it'll be out somewhere, somehow, for everybody to see it. We just have to work out the best path forward from here.
Perhaps there could well be a Blu-ray package with the original The Tunnel. I'm sure a distributor in Australia now might be interested, plus the documentary and bits and pieces of other things in the Blu-ray.
Yeah, one of the several conversations that are sailing at the moment. So we'll see how it plays out.
Okay. So Enzo, subsequent to the tunnel, and over the last 10 years, you've been involved in so many productions, I've noticed, on television, some films and so on. How do you decide what productions you take on?
Oh gosh, what a question. How long have you got? If I was going to boil it down, I think it really comes down to two factors, really. One, do I like it? Am I excited about it? You know, is it good? Which I guess is also 1.5 factors there, because do I like it and is it good has to be balanced with, do we think it's going to be commercially something that has an audience? And then the second thing I take into consideration is, am I willing to spend the next 2 to 3 years of my life doing this project? Because that's really what it takes to get especially a feature from beginning to end, from inception to, you know, release and thereon. So yeah, it's a balance of how excited am I about it, and am I prepared to give up a chunk of my life for this project? Because the first one's a pretty easy bar. I'm fairly my tastes are quite eclectic. So when someone brings me a project, it's unusual that I don't like it or see the potential in it, especially if it's coming from a team that I like. But then, you know, sitting down to watch something for 2 hours is a very different commitment to giving up a couple of years of your life to get it over the line.
Of course it is. And plus, with the amount of television you've been involved with, Transcendence, The Pet Killer, Dead House Dark, and also Getaway, which I found very interesting. How do you find that contrast between episodic or you know, lots of television as opposed to a feature film?
Well, yeah, Getaway was actually my first ever job in TV. Like, that was a long time ago. I still remember it very fondly. I worked with a whole bunch of really, really great, amazing, and interesting people. Some of whom are still floating around today in the circle of people that we work with. But yeah, look, it is a different. It's a different sphere. A lot of the projects that you've mentioned there, like Dead House Dark, for example, or, you know, the Skinfords and things like that were designed as online series. So I guess it was this kind of hybrid of the kind of thing that we were doing with the tunnel, which is using the digital space as a platform to access an audience, but the kind of storytelling that we liked to see from feature films, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of like this halfway point that made a lot of sense. So I think the episodic thing was born out of that, rather than specifically a desire for that form of storytelling. It was a bit of experimentation in those early years, and you know, we just ended up making a lot of web series. But the contrast doesn't bother me too much, because, as I say, my tastes as a viewer are very eclectic. You know, I'm happy to sit down and watch a really serious, lovely documentary, or a dumb comedy, or a great horror film, or a big action film, or whatever. Like, I've been a movie buff my entire life, so it's not hard for me to just kind of like shift gears and go, all right, this is what I'm tuning into. That's what we're doing here. Got it. Let's run with it. As opposed to trying to homogenize everything and make everything the same. I think the variety of it is what keeps you in the game.
Very good. I'm interested in what you're working on at the moment. I read that, are you working on a documentary called The Founder?
Yeah, Founder is a documentary that I'm working on at the moment, which is being produced by a company called Safety Culture. So it's a documentary about tech founders, Australian tech founders. So it's been fascinating to you know, tune into some of the stories of these people, and you know, their entrepreneurial journey is fascinating, and on top of that, their characters as humans are actually quite fascinating as well. And when you look at how those things kind of pair up for the story of their company, it's quite a wonderful thing. So hopefully that'll be done at some point my guess is mid next year. So I'm not sure what the plans are for release on that one. But COVID has made that one heck of a journey, because it's going on 2 years now, that project, thanks to the stop and start of coronavirus. But yeah, it's good. Directing a documentary project is a lot of fun.
Terrific. And are there any other things that you're juggling at the moment that you want to make?
Oh, there's plenty of things we're always juggling that we want to make, Peter. That's the trick, right? Look, there are a couple of things that are on the radar for next year, but there's nothing set in stone that's worth talking about just yet. I'd love to do another season of Dead House Dark with Shudder. That'd be a lot of fun. Time will tell.
Time will tell. It certainly will. Hopefully, things will ramp up as we hopefully get out of COVID. But let's see how we go with that. So, Enzo, just a last question I love asking. Have you seen anything else of late? Film, television, streaming, web series, anything that has impressed you?
Gosh, what was the last film I saw that impressed me? I've been watching a lot of, going back and watching a lot of my old favorites recently. So it's probably not a really fair question. You know what I have been enjoying the hell out of at the moment is the new season of Succession, which is incredible. So just the writing and the performances in that show had me gripped from episode 1, season 1. And so, every Monday we're there, me and my wife, dialing it up, making sure that we can get it as soon as we can possibly get it. So.
And what that reveals is the proliferation of streaming services and of so much more product being available out there, which I suppose is that. Do you think that's a positive in the long run, or maybe it'll become counterproductive? What do you think?
I think it's a positive in that the more avenues that, from a filmmaking point of view, from a filmmaker's point of view, I think the more avenues that we have to be able to reach audiences with the stories we want to tell can only be a positive. I think the danger in it comes from, when you have unbeatable, untakeonable platforms like Netflix or Disney Plus that kind of basically own, probably 80 to 90% of that space, it becomes very difficult to get a look in, because yes, there's a lot of content being made, there's a lot of audience clamoring for content, but if you're being thrown in one giant pool and I'm going into, theoretically pitch something to Netflix, and I know that the next meeting after me is some Hollywood A-lister pitching their project as well, that also it kind of counterbalances a little bit, and I guess that with the volume, we've seen it a little bit after COVID as well. The streamers were so hungry for content that I think the volume also means that there's a risk that the quality might slip a little bit, because it's more about volume than it is about keeping the quality up. So it's a mixed bag, but I think on the whole, it can only be a positive, right? I think I know for me, there's still films that I'm absolutely excited to get to the cinema for, and I can't wait for June comes out this week, I think. I'm dying to go and see June. They've been stringing out this bloody Ghostbusters release for the last year and a half as well. So there's plenty of things that still get me excited to get off my butt and go to a cinema. But I think that, streamers aren't going to go away. And on the whole, we just have to work out the best way forward.
Sure. No, that sounds very sensible. By the way, with Dune, if you can, see it in IMAX, right. Because a third of the film is shot in the full IMAX process, and it looks absolutely stunning. Yeah,
I'm sure it does. Okay, hot tip, got it. IMAX, done.
And the other hot tip is The Tunnel, The Other Side of Darkness, the documentary about the original film, The Tunnel, screening at Monster Fest in December. Enzo, thanks so much for talking with me.
No problems, Peter. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.